listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy, and I'm a relationship coach. I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. Something that I don't emphasize enough on this podcast is that I work with people in many different types of infidelity situations and in many different phases or stages of their infidelity situations. I also work with people who have very different goals in relation to their infidelity situations. Moreover, I work with people who don't yet know what their goals are in relation to their infidelity situation. So the point is, if you're ready for change, whether that's a change in your perspective or a change in how you're feeling, or a change in what you're actually doing in relation to your situation, I can help you make those changes. I can teach you how to relate to your infidelity situation in a different way so that you can have more of the experience that you want to have of whatever is going on. When you're ready to get to work, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. I can't wait to meet you. Today, we're going to talk about why you can't shame yourself into making sustainable, positive changes. There's an idea out there that's very prevalent in some circles that if we tell ourselves we're doing something bad, or if we tell ourselves that we are really bad for doing a particular thing, we'll change. Because, as the reasoning goes, it's bad to be bad, and so therefore we shouldn't be bad, and so therefore we should stop what we're doing so that we can stop being bad and start being good. And the thinking is that this will be adequate motivation to change. Now, I'm pretty sure you've encountered some version of this kind of logic before. And you may well have encountered this logic specifically in relation to your infidelity situation. And you may even be applying this logic to yourself in one form or another in relation to your infidelity situation. If you're engaging in anything that you think counts as infidelity, you may not like what you're doing, or you may not like certain aspects of what you're doing. Now, of course, you might not feel bad about engaging in infidelity, and that is totally fine. If you want to hear more of what I have to say about that, have a listen to episode 137, which is called If You Don't Feel Guilty About Cheating. But even if you're pretty sure that you don't think what you're doing is bad, or you don't think of yourself as bad for whatever you're doing infidelity-wise, even if you're pretty sure you don't feel guilty at all, I suggest you listen to this episode anyway, because what I'm going to talk about today has broad implications beyond simply feeling bad or not feeling bad about cheating. But all that said, for today's purposes, it's very important to acknowledge that some people do not feel good at all about the fact that infidelity happens in general, and do not feel good about participating in any kind of infidelity themselves. And on the one hand, this is totally fair. You're allowed to think whatever you want to think about infidelity as a set of human occurrences or any other human behaviors for that matter. You're certainly allowed to not like it that infidelity happens in any ways, shapes, and forms. And you're allowed to not like however you are engaging in infidelity. In a sense, this is fair and fine. But what I want to encourage you to do today is to get clear on how exactly you are thinking about not liking infidelity or not liking the fact that you are participating in some kind of infidelity if you are indeed doing that. Or, put differently, what are the exact thoughts that go through your mind if you think that infidelity is bad? And what exactly are you thinking if you think that you are bad for engaging in infidelity? What are the specific words you say to yourself when you're thinking these kinds of thoughts? In addition to getting clear on what words you're using when you talk to yourself about infidelity, I want to encourage you to get really curious about what happens when you use those words with yourself or towards yourself or to yourself or maybe even against yourself. What I want to suggest is that what you say to yourself about infidelity and yourself and your behavior matters a lot. So let's talk about how this works in practice. If you don't think that infidelity is all that great, and if you don't feel all that great about engaging in infidelity, you may notice yourself saying things to yourself like, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this. Or maybe, oh, I've really got to stop doing this. Or if the people in my life found out about this, they would all be really mad at me. Or maybe I am such a bad person. Or maybe I'm a terrible human being. Or maybe I'm such a worthless piece of shit. Some of the things people tell themselves when they're engaging in infidelity are pretty darn awful, right? This isn't a kind way to speak to yourself. And when I point this out to people, they sometimes say in response, well, what I'm doing is awful, so how can I not think of myself as an awful human being? And you too may think that whatever harsh things you are saying to yourself are simply the truth. You may think it is completely self-evident that infidelity is bad, so therefore you are bad if you are participating in any kind of infidelity. And by telling yourself this, you're just reporting the facts of life to yourself, and that might seem like a pretty reasonable thing to do. In addition to that, we sometimes think that if we're doing something we think we shouldn't be doing, telling ourselves that we shouldn't be doing it or telling ourselves that we're bad for doing it will help us stop doing it. Whatever the it is, whether it's engaging in infidelity or eating too many cupcakes or smoking cigarettes or, killing baby seals that we find on the beach or whatever, right? We tend to think there is value in scolding ourselves for what we're doing wrong, quote unquote, or shaming ourselves for what we're doing that's bad, quote unquote, or telling ourselves that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. And there are 3 things I want to say about this, about telling ourselves that we're awful or telling ourselves that we're doing something bad and therefore we need to stop. The first is that when we tell ourselves we're doing something bad, we usually think that this is a neutral observation of the objective, universal truth of the matter. For a lot of people, the idea that cheating is bad seems like an absolute truth, right? But I want to suggest that it is not an absolute truth. That idea that cheating is bad is not an absolute non-negotiable truth. It is an opinion that you have every right to hold. It's an opinion that a lot of people do hold, but that doesn't mean it's a fact. And that's important because it means you can change the way you think about yourself and your behavior if you want to. And you may want to because the way you think about yourself matters, as I'll say more about in a moment. The second thing I want to say is that we can dislike something without getting super fixated on the idea that whatever that something is bad. We can dislike engaging in infidelity without telling ourselves that we are terrible fucking people for engaging in it. Shifting our thinking from believing that infidelity is terrible and anyone who engages in it is evil doesn't mean that we have to start believing that infidelity is awesome and everyone should go out there and start engaging in some form of it immediately. Right? We don't have to do a 180 switch in our thinking to loosen our grip on the idea that something is really bad. My third point is that what you tell yourself about yourself matters. What you say to yourself about your behavior matters. What you say to yourself about who you are matters. And more specifically, telling yourself that you are bad or what you are doing is bad is not going to help you make changes that you feel good about. As I said earlier, we often think that scolding ourselves or shaming ourselves or shoulding ourselves will help us make positive changes. But I challenge you to find a time in your life when treating yourself this way helped you make sustainable positive changes. And by positive changes, I don't mean the kinds of changes that other people might think you should make, or the kinds of changes that other people might consider positive. I mean changes that you feel truly good about, right? And I bet you cannot find an example of this approach helping you to make changes that you feel truly good about. And here's why. When we tell ourselves we're doing something really bad, we may feel ashamed or guilty. We may feel embarrassed. We may feel judgmental of ourselves or towards ourselves. We may feel inferior or lacking or flawed or hopeless or irredeemable. And that's just the short list. We might feel any number of intensely uncomfortable feelings too, or instead of those feelings. Similarly, when we tell ourselves that we are bad, we might feel all of those kinds of feelings that I just mentioned, and we might feel afraid. We might feel alienated. We might feel self-loathing. When we tell ourselves we shouldn't be doing something, the same kinds of feelings might come up, but if we're telling ourselves that we shouldn't be doing something that we at least in part truly enjoy doing, we may feel conflicted in addition to all of these other feelings I've mentioned. We may feel frustrated. We may feel resentful. We may feel angry. We may feel trapped or constrained. We may feel resistant or we may feel rebellious. And for one thing, most of us don't find it very pleasant to feel these kinds of emotions, especially for extended periods of time. But not only that, feeling these kinds of emotions has an impact on what kind of actions we are able to take and not take in relation to our infidelity situation or in relation to changing whatever behavior of ours that it is that we think we shouldn't be engaging in. What I'm talking about here is known as the think, feel, act cycle, or sometimes the think, feel, do cycle. Whatever we think about our situation creates certain feelings that we experience, and the feelings we're experiencing enhance our capacity to take particular actions or restrict our capacity to take particular actions. And then whatever actions we take or do not take have a real impact on our lives. They have consequences, so to speak. Our actions and inactions create outcomes or results for us. So, for instance, if we're thinking that we are really bad for cheating on our partner and we feel shame and self-loathing, we may hide in various ways. We may withdraw in various ways. We may attempt to hide from ourselves. We may not give ourselves the opportunity to be honest with ourselves about what we want and what we don't want. We may withdraw from others. We may stay in relationships, but we may disengage from them even if we officially keep them going. We might stay in the relationship with the person we're cheating on because we feel bad about what we're doing, but we may not actively connect with that person. And we also may not assume the task of making clear decisions about our infidelity situation because we feel so bad about ourselves or what we're doing that we don't want to take a close look at what's going on. And so shame ends up being a driver of inaction and indecision and kicking the can down the road. And the result of that inaction and indecision is that we stay stuck or we stay in limbo, and that we continue engaging in the behaviors that we don't feel good about engaging in. If you take 1 point away from today's episode, let it be this: beating ourselves up for doing something often leads to us continuing to do the very thing that we don't think we should be doing, or to do the very things that we don't feel good about doing. Similarly, let's say we're married and we're involved with someone else and we feel frustrated because we really want to pursue our relationship with our other person, but we believe that we can't do that because we think it's bad to be cheating and we think it's even worse to end a committed relationship because we're cheating. Thinking that we can't do something, especially if it's something that we really want to do, usually produces some pretty strong emotions. And if we're feeling those strong emotions, for instance, if we're feeling frustrated or trapped, we may effectively keep ourselves frustrated or trapped through our very own actions. For instance, if you believe you cannot leave your marriage and you feel trapped, you are unlikely to take any steps towards leaving your marriage. And then you may end up proving yourself right by not leaving your marriage. You effectively make it true that you can't leave your marriage. And meanwhile, you keep yourself in the same relationship quandary. You keep your infidelity situation going, right? You keep doing the things that you don't feel great about doing, and you don't find a way to resolve this that you consider satisfactory. In general, when we beat ourselves up for whatever it is we're doing that we think we shouldn't be doing, we're spending our energy on self-reproach rather than on problem solving. And quite simply, self-reproach tends to keep us stuck where we are, whereas problem solving helps us move forward. In addition to that, when we beat ourselves up for doing whatever it is that we think we shouldn't be doing, we often feel terrible. When we tell ourselves that we are bad or tell ourselves that what we're doing is bad, we usually feel pretty bad. And sometimes when we feel pretty bad, we don't know how to deal with that. We don't want to feel bad. We just want to feel better. And so we may do some things to help ourselves feel better that may provide some temporary relief, but don't actually help us deal with the situation at hand, right? More specifically, if we're cheating on someone we committed to being monogamous with, and we feel terrible about that, we may try to soothe our discomfort by spending more time with our affair partner, or doing more of whatever our infidelity behaviors are, or finding another affair partner, another few people to hang out with that isn't our committed partner, right? And doing these things isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself, although it could be. But just like the point I made a moment ago, seeking out ways to soothe or avoid our discomfort does not equate with problem solving. It does not equate with truly resolving our situation in a way that we feel good about. This is why you can't shame yourself or scold yourself or should yourself into making sustainable, positive changes. This is why self-acceptance is a far better motivator of lasting change than self-reproach. Now, when I say self-acceptance, I don't mean that you brainwash yourself or gaslight yourself, to use the more popular terminology these days, and tell yourself that the behaviors you're engaging in that you don't like are actually just fine. What I do mean is that you accept that what is happening, and you allow yourself to consider that there may be some very human reasons why you are doing what you're doing. The point of accepting yourself where you are and accepting what you're doing is not to convince yourself that it's okay to keep doing things that you don't want to keep doing. It's to get yourself out of the version of the think, feel, act cycle in which your shame keeps you stuck. It's to get you out of the version of the think, feel, act cycle where you think, oh, I'm doing something really bad. And then you feel really bad. And from there, it just isn't possible for you to take responsibility for your situation in a way that leads to change that you feel good about. Here's a great quote that speaks to what I'm saying very nicely. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. That's from Carl R. Rogers, who was a psychologist and a psychotherapist with an interesting history. And I'll say that again. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Now, some people are like, well, I get that, but I cannot apply that kind of thinking to my infidelity situation. There's no way I can think of what I'm doing infidelity-wise as anything other than something I shouldn't be doing. And on the one hand, I think this is fair enough. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've no doubt heard me say that the behaviors we think count as infidelity are neutral until we give them meaning. The idea that infidelity is bad is an optional belief. You don't have to opt into thinking that you are bad or what you're doing is bad if you're engaging in anything you think counts as infidelity. But as I've been emphasizing today, a lot of folks don't want to opt out of believing that infidelity, generally speaking, is kind of bad. A lot of people don't want to think of their behavior as acceptable. And that's totally fair. If you are committed to this kind of thinking, if you don't want to think of infidelity as something other than bad, the question becomes, how can you think about what you're doing in a way that doesn't lead you to continue creating results that you don't like? On the one hand, it's fair enough to not think that infidelity is a great thing. But on the other hand, if you keep thinking about what you're doing as something that's bad or something you shouldn't be doing, you are probably going to continue to create a feeling state from which it is very hard for you to take actions in relation to your situation that you feel good about. It's that darn think, feel, act cycle. It can work for us or it can work against us. In order for you to deal with your situation in a way that you feel good about, you need to be able to feel something other than bad about yourself or bad about what you're doing, right? And that means that you need to think something different about what yourself and what you're doing. Now, you may not like what's happening. You may not like what you're doing, but if it's happening, it's happening. If you're doing it, you're doing it. And you could always just stop doing whatever you're doing if you want to. But if you haven't stopped yet, it may be because you don't want to, or at least you don't completely want to. And as uncomfortable as it may be to recognize this, I encourage you to consider that accepting that you're doing something that you may feel not so great about for reasons that you kind of like, or for reasons that are important to you or are legitimate to you, is an essential step in enabling yourself to actually deal with your infidelity situation in a different way, i.e., in a way that you can ultimately feel good about. So in the service of that, it's important to recognize that more than one thing can be true at once. It can be true that in some respects you don't like what you're doing. It can be true that you don't think infidelity is a great thing. And it can be true that you are doing what you're doing anyway, because in other respects you really like doing it. You're getting something out of it that's really important to you. Recognizing this tension may be uncomfortable, but I want to suggest that there's a lot more possibility for change when we tell ourselves that we may have come to a point in our lives when we don't like something that we're doing, but we have very human reasons for doing it, than when we tell ourselves that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, right? Telling ourselves that we've come to a point in our lives in which our values and desires and priorities are in conflict opens up a lot more room for change than telling ourselves that we are a bad person does. There's a big difference between telling ourselves that we're doing something really bad and we need to stop, and telling ourselves that we want to make changes in our behavior so that we can live in a way that is more aligned with our priorities and values. We can dislike infidelity or dislike engaging in infidelity without demonizing ourselves for engaging in it. Sometimes people are terrified to let go of the idea that infidelity is really, really bad and that by engaging in it, they are really, really bad. Because it seems like if they adjust their beliefs even slightly in this department, they will be entirely abandoning their entire moral code, and then their world will implode immediately. And I understand that changing our thinking in significant ways can be really scary. If we've been adhering to firm beliefs about the way things are or the way things are supposed to be, it can be terrifying to even consider adjusting those beliefs. Humans tend to like to have a coherent moral universe. We tend to like for things to make sense. We tend to like to have a clear sense of what's right and what's wrong and where we fit into that right and wrong scheme of things. And in a sense, there isn't necessarily anything wrong with thinking these ways and liking these things. But sometimes the beliefs that we cling to don't help us as much as we think they do. And often, believing that infidelity is really bad or believing that we are really bad for engaging in it keeps us in our infidelity situations longer. The great irony, and of course, I'm talking about when we don't want to stay in our infidelity situation. If you think it's bad and you get off on thinking of yourself as bad and you love it, by all means, keep doing it. That's great if that's your thing. Fantastic. But what I'm talking about here is genuinely not wanting to be doing this so-called bad thing and that keeping you stuck. The great big irony is that when we try to scold ourselves or shame ourselves or should ourselves into changing, we often keep on doing the thing we shouldn't be doing, we think we shouldn't be doing, I should say, for even longer. So the point of being willing to consider adjusting our thinking a little bit about how bad infidelity might or might not be is to help ourselves live in ways that we feel good about. Adjusting the belief that infidelity is really bad and we shouldn't be engaging in it isn't about letting ourselves off the hook. It's about letting ourselves out of the prison we create for ourselves when we stay stuck in shame or fear or self-loathing or resentment or frustration. It's pretty hard to make lasting positive changes from those emotional states. The think, feel, act cycle just doesn't work that way. Feeling terrible about ourselves does not help us take actions that we feel good about. Feeling terrible about ourselves is usually a great recipe for avoiding dealing with situations we consider difficult and for seeking out ways to avoid and distract ourselves from our discomfort. And some of our pain-avoiding practices may have some additional consequences that we don't really like. If you're listening to this episode and thinking, okay, I'm with you. I really want to stop beating myself up for the things I'm doing infidelity-wise, but I just don't know how to do it. Let's work together. There is a certain amount of general guidance I can provide on the podcast. And beyond that, it's all about applying the tools and concepts I teach to the specifics of your unique situation. So if you're ready to begin doing that and you'd like my help in doing that, the first step is to schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. And you can also learn more about the current coaching packages I offer new clients after that introductory session, as well as my current pricing through the services page of my website. But in terms of just a little more general guidance, let me point out that although we tend to think of cheating as an individual problem or an individual failing or an individual moral flaw, we as a society create the conditions in which people cheat. It may be fair to say that we as a society set up the conditions in which cheating becomes all but inevitable. And if you want to hear more about what I have to say on that topic, check out episode 108, which is called Why Do People Cheat? All right, everyone, that is almost it for today. The last thing I want to tell you is that you are invited to send me a question, which I will answer, or at least try to answer, on a future Ask Me Anything podcast episode. If you send me a question and I answer it on the show, your name will not be associated with your question. All of the question askers will remain totally anonymous. So if you would like to send me a question, you can do that through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. Go to the top right corner of the homepage and you'll see a tab that says Contact. Click where it says Contact and you'll be taken to a form you can use to submit your question. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.